That was a very generous introduction, so say thank you for that, Stephanie. You were kind enough to mention the Pulitzer back in 1993. My fondest memory of that, one of the boys was, my son's was then in junior high school at the Jesuit Academy in Detroit, and he went to school the next day and he told his teacher his dad had just won the Pulitzer surprise. This book is really a look at the evolution of modern American culture through certain automobiles, and I hasten to say they are not the best automobiles or the worst automobiles. The idea was they had to be automobiles that because they existed, they changed how the way we think and live as a people. Before I started work on the book, just in terms of conceptualizing, that's really a key part of journalism, I sort of stood back and said, forget about cars for a minute. I mean, American culture, if you look at it for the last 100 or so years, is this sort of constant tug of war between the practical and the pretentious, the ordinary and the ostentatious, uptown, downtown, Saturday night, Sunday morning, all that sort of thing. And that's largely reflected in the cars that I selected. The Chrysler minivan, when it came out in 1984, became sort of the unofficial vehicle and the symbol of the soccer mom. And in the 1990s, the political pundits decided that soccer moms were a huge electoral political force, basically. And in the '96 election between Clinton and Bob Dole, the New York Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, other papers sent reporters out to soccer games to interview minivan driving mothers, and one of my favorite little episodes was when a reporter in the Bay Area asked a woman, well, how does it feel to be a political force? And her response was, I got to go home and thaw something for dinner tonight. I just don't have time to be a political force today. And Chrysler actually became so enamored of this whole soccer mom image that they actually drew up plans for a television commercial, I kid thee not, that showed an embryonic minivan growing inside a mother's womb. And I'll just close with one of the last car in the book is the Toyota Prius. And one of my favorite Prius sort of stories that I go into in the book a little bit is in the spring of 2007, a guy was arrested here in the Bay Area for going more than 100 miles an hour on the freeway in his Prius, which, by the way, takes more courage to do that than it does in, let's say, a Corvette, okay? But he, so this arrest came to the attention of the guy that writes the Mr. Roadshow column for the San Jose Mercury News, and he was hot on the story because the guy who was arrested was Steve Wozniak. And this great online dialogue sort of takes place, and sort of the last part of it was Mr. Roadshow said, well, how did it feel going 104 in the Prius? How did the car handle? And Wozniak wrote back and said, well, actually, I was surprised at how stable it was and how well it handled. He said, it really was kind of like my Hummer, which, I mean, hello, right? Both industries were hit by disruptive forces. In the 1970s, the Japanese car companies appeared on the scene with a whole different approach to building cars. And Detroit just couldn't adjust. And the first thing that Detroit did was, blame Americans, blame car buyers. We're not patriotic, we're not buying a Detroit car. Okay, well, fast forward to the last decade or so when the news industry, specifically the newspaper industry, was hit with a disruptive force called the internet. And the first thing that the journalists did was blame Americans. They blamed the customers. Said, well, people aren't serious anymore. They don't believe in what we, they don't really care about their community or their country. Well, actually, news consumption is at record highs, but the business model is changing. I think a journalist is qualified to write about anything if you take the time to learn about it. I mean, this book did take me 5 years, okay? And it wasn't a straight 5 years, but it took me about 3.5 years to do. I covered the auto industry for a long time, and, I guess what I'd lived in the culture, right? But I will confess to being very surprised, having covered the auto industry for as long as I had, and how much new I found during the research and reporting process about this book. I mean, I had no idea that the big tail fins of the 50s were originally sold as safety devices. It was nonsense, of course. But, so I think, journalism, the great thing about journalism, it's sort of a lifelong learning experience. I mean, any subject you can learn more about, right? And that was the fun of doing it.